lecture, we had essentially started looking at the analysis of a dipole antenna, which is of any arbitrary length. And I had considered the center fed case where the upper half and lower half of the antenna have virtually identical lengths. The feed is in the center, the generator through a coaxial cable and appropriate impedance matching network will feed the antenna at the center. We would ignore the effect of feed in the analysis. We would assume also that the current distribution along the length of the antenna is approximately of sinusoidal form as shown in this figure. These are not 100% correct assumptions for current, but they are close enough. After assuming this and keeping in mind that the antenna is lined up along the z-axis, it is clear that vector A or vector potential A will have only z component. And to calculate that, I made several assumptions. Let me go through them once again. I assumed that we will not be interested in near field only. In fact, I assumed that we will be interested in far field only. Near field calculation will be even more complicated if you go for that. So my assumption, the first assumption was at least that the point of observation is sufficiently far away from the antenna and from the origin of the coordinate system as well, so that the imaginary lines drawn from the point of observation P to all parts of antenna length are all parallel to each other, and assuming that they make it an angle theta with z-axis, which is the direction along the length of the antenna. That was assumption number one. And now the length of the antenna can not be assumed to be small enough. So we have to make a distinction between capital R and small r before we proceed to derive the formula for AZ. And based on this geometry that I'm showing in figure 3, the formula for capital R turns out to be small r minus z cos theta approximately. As a result, the formula for AZ becomes what is shown in equation 3. Capital R has gone inside the integral now. And from this point on, it is an analytical challenge that we try to fight. First of all, IZ value will be different depending on whether small z is between minus h by 2 and 0 or between 0 and plus h by 2. The formulas are already here. So these two formulas will be plugged into the equation 3. Along with that, the equation for capital R would also come in, the integral, this one, equation 1. So plugging it all, I did it last time, but let me go through it once again. So these are this is the long formula for AZ. It's impossible to analytically solve it. So we made some more assumptions. One, in fact, the only assumption now is that small r is large enough compared to z, at least in the denominators of the integrands. Okay. If we do that, small r comes out from the denominators of both the integrands. But in the numerators, we still have reasonably complicated terms. And this is what I was solving at the end of previous lecture. Everything else is coming out of the integrals. So if we do this and then take one of the integrals at a time, and let's call the first integral as int1, the second one as int2. In the second integral, I made a substitution by using a dummy variable z prime equal to minus z. And I showed that int2 becomes equation 12. Okay. You can follow the steps carefully. So integral 1 plus integral 2 then becomes given by equation 13. Because of the fact that e to the power j beta z cos theta and e to the power minus j beta z cos theta will sum up to 2 times j sine beta h minus z. Okay. Just making sure nothing is wrong. One minute. Yeah, okay. So once we move forward this way, integral 1 plus integral 2 becomes manageable at least. And after doing this long derivation and putting the limits, etc., the final formula for integral 1 plus integral 2 turns out to be this equation. And plugging it back into the equation for AZ, this is what I got. This is where I stopped last time. This is the formula for AZ. That is the end of step number 1. We are actually getting sine square theta in the denominator. And in the numerator, we are getting cos of beta h cos theta minus cos of beta h. Okay. Now, the next step will be, based on this AZ, figure out h, as we did for Hertzian dipole as well as for short dipole. Half-wave dipole is a special case. We'll come to that a little later. So if I have not done that probably in too many details, but still, you have to be aware that the step is very similar to what we did for Hertzian dipole. HR is 0. Again, HZ will be 0. H5 will be 1 upon mu naught del cross A R component. And we know the formula for del cross A. We have seen it several times. So using all that and using the well-known expressions that we got for Hertzian dipole, which continue to apply here also because of the same geometry. AR equal to AZ cos theta, A theta equal to minus AZ sin theta, A phi equal to 0. Rotational symmetry gives us d by d phi equal to 0. Everything like we did for Hertzian dipole. Same thing is going to be applicable here also. So doing all that, H phi turns out to be, you can follow the steps here carefully. It turns out to be quite an expression. But it ultimately simplifies, though. And it's not too bad at the end. You can verify this derivation yourself. That this should finally lead to H phi equal to this formula. It is still complicated enough, but not too bad. Cosine of beta h cos theta minus cos of beta h, and the entire thing divided by sine theta. Okay. And once you have got this, you apply one of the Maxwell's equations to get E components. In far field, again, you will see that ER would be 0, E phi would be 0, and E theta would be simply eta naught multiplied by H phi. You can show it for your own sake if you want. So in the far field, again, we are getting only E theta and H phi, as we got for the other two dipoles also. And E theta and H phi are related through eta naught, as we saw in other dipoles also. Now, the special case that is actually very commonly used is when the length is lambda by 2. It's called half wave dipole or lambda by 2 dipole. L is lambda by 2, so H will be lambda by 4. So beta H will be 2 pi by lambda multiplied by lambda by 4. And the formula for AZ will simplify a little bit for the half wave dipole. Yeah, here it is. Beta H will be pi by 2. So cos of beta H will be 0. So if you look at the formula for AZ, cos beta H will go to 0 and cos beta H cos theta will become cos of pi by 2 cos theta. So the formula for a lambda by 2 dipole is AZ equal to this equation, equation 18. Lambda dipole is also possible. 1.5 lambda dipole is also possible and so on. But lambda by 2 is very commonly used. There is a reason for it. We'll come to that soon. Okay, so once you have got E theta and H phi, and we are interested only in far field, you can do the calculation for S once again using these well-known formulas that we have seen. What will happen is, again, only SR would survive. On S theta and S phi will go to 0. Lot of things are similar conceptually to what we saw for Hertzian dipole. Just because length has become large does not change many other things. This is what I have done here. I plug in the value for H phi magnitude, and this is the complicated formula for SR. Okay. For each particular length and based on the frequency involved, beta H will have a different value. So this has to be, and theta also, depending on where you are observing the value of SR, theta would also change. And of course, the magnitude of the maximum feed current will also matter. The distance at which you are measuring SR would also matter, obviously. And eta naught is a well-known number, 120 pi ohm. Now for lambda by 2 dipole, again, SR becomes slightly simplified because cos beta H goes to 0 and beta H becomes pi divided by 2. So these are the formulas. This is the formula for SR. Equation 41 is the formula for SR for that special case. For any other case, you use equation 40. Now, next step, calculate the radiation resistance. For a dipole of arbitrary length, it is very difficult. It's not impossible, but it's quite complicated to get the formula for radiation resistance. But for lambda by 2 dipole, it is still not that difficult. I'll first give you the formula without derivation for a dipole of arbitrary length L, which is equal to 2H, and then I'll go to the specific case of L equal to lambda by 2. In the formula for radiation resistance for a dipole of arbitrary length, 3 radiation integrals are seen, and these are actually known as radiation integrals. Tables for them are available Even in MATLAB, I think there are functions that can do these calculations for you directly. Most of the programming languages meant for our kind of calculations do have these functions built in, or you have to write your own function for each of these. These three radiation integrals are given here, 49, 50, and 51. One of them is known as S1, the other one is known as C1, and the third one is known as SI. Sorry, CI, not C1. CI is known as cosine integral, SI is known as sine integral, and I have not seen a particular name for S1. These integrals appear very frequently in a lot of radiation related analysis. Dipole is only one example. In many other cases also that you will see later in this course, these integrals will show up. They need to be numerically evaluated, first of all, for each value of x. But tables are available, and as I said, calculations can be done in programming languages also, either using built-in functions or through writing your own functions, through your own routines, or through your own whatever you want to call them. Now, how are they defined? For a particular argument x, S1 is defined by equation 49, which means integral between 0 and x, 1 minus cos v upon v integrated with respect to v. V is a dummy variable. After integration, it will go away. Ci is minus integral from x to infinity of cos v divided by v dv. Okay. There are ways given in many books in which you can do the calculation. Essentially, what you do is you use the infinite series functions for cos and sine to do these integrals. I know that much for sure. But I'm not going to go in that direction in this course. Assume that these functions will be known to you for a given value of x. Si is sine v by v integrated from 0 to x with respect to v. And there is an additional relationship which connects Ci with S1. Ci is natural log of x plus some constant minus S1 of x, where C is known as Euler's constant. Its value up to 8 digits is given here, 0.5772157. Actually 7 digits, I think. Yeah. Normally 0.5772 is what people take. Now, if these integrals are assumed to be known, the formula for radiation resistance of a center-fired dipole of arbitrary length is this complicated one. Equation 43. I'm not proving it. Derivations are possible. You can try it out yourself. Based on the basic methodology we were using for calculating R-rad. You basically have to figure out the total radiated power and then connect it to the effective current square. So this is the formula. S1 of B, small b is another variable here, which is 2 beta h. S1b minus F1 cos B plus F2 sin B plus F3 S1b minus F4 Si B. Okay. And this is meant for air medium. For other media, it can be suitably modified. I think 30 would be replaced by 30 divided by square root of epsilon r, as far as I know. But don't take my word as final word. Better be double checked. There are alternatives to this equation as well. Simpler one, which don't require radiation integrals, but they are less accurate. This actually remains a topic of research even today in terms of simplifying the result so that you don't need to calculate radiation integrals every time you need to calculate the radiation resistance of a dipole antenna of arbitrary length. Anyway, be aware of this formula. Now for the specific case where length is lambda by 2, you can possibly use this formula as well. But I'll show you that in that case, you don't need to use radiation integrals. the results can be obtained directly using basic principles. The value of SR for a lambda by 2 dipole is, first of all, E theta and H phi are given here, and SR is also given somewhere. Yeah, just a minute. Here. This is the value of SR, equation 41, for lambda by 2 dipole. And once you know SR, you imagine the antenna to be the center of an imaginary sphere of radius r, radius small r, as we did for Hertzian dipole, same thing here. And then you take an elemental strip on the surface of that sphere, calculate the area contained in that strip and multiply that area by SR and integrate the result from 0 to pi to get the total radiated power. This funda doesn't change just because antenna has changed. So basically I use this SR along with formula for WR. In Hertzian dipole, SR was different. Here SR is different compared to Hertzian. So mathematics is going to be little more challenging, but it's doable. Okay, so if I take SR formula multiplied by 2 pi r square sine theta, you see that r square goes away and sine square theta in the denominator of SR will become now sine theta because sine theta is being multiplied to the entire thing. So WR formula is this. In fact, it has been shown that 0 to pi limit can be converted to 0 to pi by 2 and a 2 can be brought out. I'm not proving it, but it has been shown. It's a symmetric integral. Now, how to calculate this integral? This is a definite integral. One method is to do it numerically. The other method is also kind of numerical, but without going to any computer. This is the integral we want to figure out. So the method used in the book is let us define a new independent variable u as cos theta. That means du will be minus sine theta d theta. And d theta by sine theta becomes minus du upon sine square theta. And sine square theta is 1 minus cos square theta. So that is 1 minus cos u, 1 minus u square. So d theta by sine theta becomes minus du upon 1 minus u square. You substitute all this in the original formula for integral that you want to resolve. D theta divided by sine theta in equation 56 can be replaced by minus du upon 1 minus u square. And the rest is cos square of pi by 2 multiplied by u. That can be broken as 1 plus cos of pi u, and 2 will come out because of that in the denominator. Okay, you know the relationship between cos 2 theta and cos theta, and cos theta and cos theta by 2. That formula is being used here. The comparison is being done that cos square has been replaced by 1 plus cos of 2 times that argument, along with a correction by 2 in the denominator. Okay, it's all elementary. I think you can do it. So this integral transforms to this value. Where u is the new independent variable. And limits also change, by the way. From 0 to pi by 2, they now become 0 to 1. And minus sign is absorbed in the process. Now what do? It is still not solved. You know that 1 upon 1 minus u square is 1 upon 1 minus u plus 1 upon 1 plus u and some correction to that. Right? A factor of 2 will come out in the denominator. So the unknown integral is further modified to equation 61. This is one method. There must be several other methods to figure out this integral, I'm sure. And then what you do is you take one term at a time within the brackets, within the second bracket. And in one case, you use a dummy variable u prime equal to minus u. You try doing it yourself. You'll see that the two integrals combine. And what you get is the limit also combined because of the two integrals. The final formula for integral that you want to calculate is equation 62. Okay. Again, it is still not doable. Let's see how we handle this. We choose another dummy variable or another independent variable. Small v equal to pi multiplied by 1 plus u. That means dv is pi du and dv divided by v is du upon 1 plus u. And pi u is v minus pi. You can see all that here, right? You substitute all that here in the equation 62. The formula for the unknown integral finally becomes equation 67. I'm going fast, I know, because I think you can handle it by yourself. The final formula for the unknown integral is equation 67. And here you see actually one of the radiation integrals. So we could not get away from that. This was 1 minus cos v divided by v integrated from 0 to something. That is actually one of the radiation integrals. Oh, 1 minute. Integral between 0 and x. Yeah, this guy. Yeah, S1. S1 with x equal to 2 pi is what you are seeing there. This one. This is S1 actually, with x equal to 2 pi. Anyway, we can calculate it without going to any computer. You have a well-known series, infinite series for cos v, right? Which is given here. Plug it in the integrand. 1 minus 1 will become 0. And then the rest of the terms will change their sign. 1 by 4 remains as it is. Integral 0 to 2 pi remains as it is. Integral of v square divided by factorial of 2 will be required. Integral of minus v. Yeah, there is a v in the denominator also. So actually, sorry, it's not v square, it's v. The first term has only v, not v square. Because there is 1 upon v also involved in the integrand. That removes the power by 1 in all the terms. That reduces the power by 1. So v divided by square root of 2 minus v cube divided by square root of 4 plus v5 divided by square root of 6 and so on. That is the integrand. It's an infinite series. We can sum it up to a point where we think we have done enough. So v divided by square root of 2 will have integral v square divided by 2 multiplied by factorial of 2. Okay. And similarly for other terms. And then you put the values 0 and 2 pi. 0 of course makes everything 0. So that hardly matters. Instead of small v, you'll put 2 pi throughout. And do enough, consider enough number of terms in this infinite series so that you get sufficient accuracy. Maybe a MATLAB program here could help. So I think after taking sufficient number of terms in this infinite series on the right hand side, the value of integral, including the 1/4 factor, has been calculated to be approximately as 0.6093. You can do it, you can verify it yourself. Take say 10 terms and see whether you get this number approximately. So the radiation resistance, which involved this integral, can now be calculated. This was the formula for radiation resistance of a dipole of λ/2 length. WR is here. Yeah, so once you calculate WR, and remember that I effective is Im divided by square root of 2, including that, and including the value of integral that you have figured out. Just go back to that formula to make sure you get this correct. This is WR, right? WR is supposed to be eta naught, WR is supposed to be R rad multiplied by I effective square. I effective is Im divided by square root of 2. Okay. So Im is square root of 2 times I effective. Plug that here, take the value of the integral as 0.60, whatever number we got, plug it all in, and take the coefficient of I effective square on the right hand side. That will give you the radiation resistance. That turns out to be eta naught divided by pi into 0.6093 ohm. This is approximate, but good enough. And eta naught is 120 pi ohm. So 120 multiplied by 0.6093. This gives you almost 73 ohm as the radiation resistance of a λ/2 dipole, which is very large compared to the radiation resistance we saw for Hertzian dipole, short dipole, etc., where the numbers were more like milliohm or something. So λ/2 dipole definitely will strong quite well, will radiate quite well compared to the other ones. For the same amount of current fed to a Hertzian dipole and a λ/2 dipole, you will see a lot more radiated power in case of a λ/2 dipole. That's for sure. That's why this kind of dipole is very practical. Other thing is the input impedance depends, at least at the resonant frequency of the dipole, it depends on the radiation resistance only. So the input impedance is also almost close to 75 ohm, which is a standard value for coaxial lines. So impedance matching is also easier in case of a λ/2 dipole compared to other ones. Now, I told you last time that besides dipole, we also have something called a monopole, where we remove the bottom half of the antenna and replace it by a ground plane. That is possible for a λ/2 dipole also. In fact, for any dipole of arbitrary length, corresponding monopole can always be thought of. For a λ/2 dipole, if you remove the bottom half, you get a λ/4 monopole, as long as you have put a ground plane. Yeah, I think I'm showing it here. Yes. In this case, the field formulas will be the same as we got for λ/2 dipole. But the power radiated will be only in the top half. So the radiation resistance will be approximately half of what we got for the corresponding dipole. So radiation resistance for a λ/4 monopole is 36.5 ohm approximately. Obviously, the length is now λ/4, so we call it λ/4 monopole. Okay. There's a lot more about dipoles, but I'll keep coming back to it as we go along. I mean, look at some solved problems. This is something that probably we have done, or maybe something similar has been done in the past, but let's look at it once again. A 1 meter long dipole antenna is fed by a 1 megahertz current with maximum amplitude of 12 amperes. Yeah, I think we did something like that, but fine, let's continue looking at it. Calculate the value of the average power density, that means SR, radiated by this antenna at a distance of 5 kilometers in a direction which is at 45 degrees. And then repeat at 30 megahertz also. Fine. So this calculation is fairly straight. This is a Argand dipole. I think we'd solved this in the past. First thing you do is you calculate lambda for the given frequency. It turns out to be 300 meters. DL by lambda is small enough, so it's a Argand dipole. You use the formula for SR for the Argand dipole and calculate the value required. We have done this in the past. Now, second problem. Repeat problem 1. This is what we have not done. Repeat problem 1 at 150 megahertz. You calculate the lambda value first. It turns out to be only 2 meters. The length is 1 meter, the physical length of the antenna. This is where your judgment call matters. You cannot use Argand dipole formulas anymore in the second problem, because L by lambda in the second problem is half. Actually, it's a lambda by 2 dipole you are looking at in the second. Same antenna, but at a different frequency, has become a lambda by 2 dipole. In the previous case, it was Argand dipole. In problem 1, the same antenna is a Argand dipole because of the frequency involved. In problem 2, it has become a lambda by 2 dipole because of the frequency. These are the kind of judgment calls you should be able to make and pick the correct equations to use. Okay. So I will not be able to use I will not be able to use Argand dipole formulas in this case. I need the SR formula for lambda by 2 dipole, which I have derived already in the previous document. And of course, then the calculations. Theta is, I think, 45 degrees. So I plug in the values. Small r is given as, I think, 5 kilometers, I believe. Yeah, 5 kilometers. So 5,000 meters. Make sure the units are correct when you are doing calculations. 5 kilometers is 5,000 meters. So put that there. Okay. I'm surprised. I'm putting 25. Oh, yeah. I'm putting 10 to the power minus 6. Fine. So that's okay. Cos of pi by 2 cos theta. Be very careful here. Cos theta is 1 upon square root of 2. But the entire term within the brackets is pi by 2 multiplied by cos theta. So pi by 2 multiplied by 1 upon square root of 2. Don't put 1 by square root 2 for entire cos function here. Anyway, hopefully you will be able to do these calculations using your own calculator. And hopefully you will get the same answer that I got. Okay, plug in all the values. Yeah, by the way, IM is involved. While the given current is, yeah, it is also IM of 12 amperes. So 12 into 12 is 144. Okay, so I think I'm okay there also. 8 pi square multiplied by 25, that gives me 200 pi square. Kilometer to meter conversion is taken care of by having 10 to the power minus 6 there. And cos square of pi divided by 2 square root of 2 has to be calculated on the calculator. 1 upon square root 2 is there in the denominator, which brings out 2. Hopefully I have accounted for that somewhere. Yeah, I've made 120 pi h 240 pi because of that. It's always, iffy that these calculations are there, but you got to do them. It's good to have probably a program doing all this all the time, but in the exam, it's not possible. That's why you have to be conversant with these calculations. Hopefully, you'll get the answer that I got. 10.84 microwatt per meter. So one thing you should be aware of is that at larger distances away from the antenna, the SR values are typically in microwatt per meter square, or at the most milliwatt per meter square. Don't give me answers like megawatt, that is ridiculous. So if there is something wrong in your calculations, at least get to appreciate the fact that units must be right. Little bit mistake in calculations is okay, but if you are screwing up even on the units, they're giving me megawatt per meter square, that would be almost unacceptable. Radiated power density is low enough, for most practical currents. Practical currents are like 1 to maybe 20 amperes or so. After that, it's too expensive anyway to feed the antenna. So don't give me answers like megawatt per meter square, etc. That will not be seen in real life. Anyway, the next problem, what does it say? Okay, it's a short dipole. Good. We have done the derivations. I think I'll repeat the results here when necessary. For a center-fed short dipole antenna, a reasonably accurate assumption is that the current distribution is suitably linear. Yeah, we have done that. And that the current goes to 0 at the antenna's two ends. Yeah, we have done all that. Okay, it's written here once again. Good. With this starting point, calculate the approximate value of the distance in terms of the operating wavelength at which the amplitude of the radiated field will equal that of the induction field. By the way, induction field, I think, was 1 upon r square term, and the last one was called by something else, electrostatic term or something. Yeah, electrostatic field. Assume theta equal to 45 degrees. So it's not a calculation example, really. It's not going to require the use of calculator, I believe. Let's see how we do it. Okay, the formula for E theta and H phi for this case is already done. Okay. We would start with near field formulas. There's a big factor outside the bracket. Let's say it is K. Let's write only those terms which are depending on small r within the brackets. Everything else is a constant for a given frequency, given length, given input current, etc. And they have told us that it's short dipole. So I've picked the correct formula for magnitude of E theta of a short dipole. You see there are three r dependent terms, 1 upon r, 1 upon r square, and 1 upon r cube. Okay, and ER formula is also given there. It is available in my other notes. You can double check from there. And E phi is 0, we know for sure. This is near field, by the way. In far field, ER would also go to 0. Now, radiation term is 1 upon r, induction term is 1 upon r square, and electrostatic term is 1 upon r cube. I told you that in the past, but if you have forgotten, just take it from me once again. Now, the question is, at what distance, that means at what value of r, will the amplitude of the 1 upon r term equal the amplitude of 1 upon r square term? Okay, that's what it is. Let's concentrate on E theta for now. Coefficient of 1 upon r term is j beta. Coefficient of 1 upon r square term is 1. So when will they be equal? When j beta goes to 1. Okay. Beta upon r1. Let me see. Yeah, I'm ignoring j because we are talking magnitudes. So let's not worry about it. Beta upon r1 equal to 1 upon r1 square. Yeah, that's when these two amplitudes will become equal. Supposing the value is r1 at which these two become equal, then the formula is beta upon r1 equal to 1 upon r1, which you can simplify further as remembering that beta is 2 pi divided by lambda. So it turns out that r1 is approximately lambda by 2 pi, lambda divided by 2 pi, which is lambda divided by 6 approximately. So at a distance of about lambda by 6 from the antenna, the radiated term will be almost equal to the induction term in magnitude. Actually, this would apply to Hertzian dipole also, I know. Okay. Now the second question is, at what value of R the radiation term would be equal to electrostatic term? Okay. Then obviously beta upon R should be equal to 1 upon beta R cube, ignoring J, and comparing the first term with the last term, and amplitudes have to be equal. Supposing that value of R is R2, then beta divided by R2 should be equal to 1 upon beta R2 cube. Yeah. And this you can further simplify. You will get R2 equal to again lambda by 6 almost, which is good. So at the same distance, even the third term is also going to be almost equal to the radiation term. Of course, take this result with a pinch of salt always, because we have not bothered about ER at all. If I had actually included ER, which I have not done, but you can, I should actually calculate the total magnitude of E by doing square root of ER square plus E theta square, and then do each calculation, ideally speaking. But I'm assuming that ER contribution to total E is not that large. Maybe it's a wrong assumption. So whatever I have come up with is an approximate answer. A real answer will require a lot more calculations, and maybe analytically there will be no solution. You take magnitude of ER square, magnitude of E theta square, add them up and take the square root. That will be the actual value of magnitude of E. And based on that, you should actually give the answer. But since that will require a lot more analysis, I confined my case to ER equal to almost negligible. At least I got an approximate answer for sure. Always be aware of the limits under which or limitations under which you are giving the answer. Okay, one more problem, let's say. The total radiated power from a quarter wave monopole, okay, antenna radiating in air medium has been measured to be W. Okay. Numerical value is not given. Fine. Watts. The magnitude of the radiated electric field strength, that means E, assuming far field conditions, okay, at a distance D, small d is given in miles, American system. In case you don't remember, 1 mile is approximately equal to 1.6 kilometers. So at a distance D from the antenna in a plane perpendicular to the antenna's length, that means theta is 90 degrees. And the magnitude of E at a distance d is E effective millivolt per meter. Again, numerical value is not given, instead a symbol is given. Your job is to work out the approximate mathematical formula describing the interdependence of W epsilon, E effective and D. Keeping in mind the units. D is in miles, E effective is in millivolts per meter, and W is in watts. You have to account for all that also in the derivation. First of all, it's a lambda by 4 monopole. We know that approximately speaking, the radiated power W is 36.5 multiplied by I effective square. 36.5 is the radiation resistance of a lambda by 4 monopole. We have seen that in the previous document. E effective formula is the same as we got for lambda by 2 dipole. And if you take peak value, then you see peak current on the right hand side. But since you are taking effective value of E, you will see I effective on the right hand side. Theta is pi by 2 in this particular case. So I have simplified the formula. Cos pi by 2 goes to 1. Sorry, cos pi by 2 goes to 0. So 0 multiplied by pi by 2 is 0. So cos 0 is 1. And sin pi by 2 is 1. So E effective simplifies to 60 I effective upon D. But D is in meter in this case, because E is supposed to be in volts per meter by default. Okay. Now I effective square, based on this, without worrying about units right now, let's look at the MKS system first. The I effective square will be E effective into D divided by 3600. That is I effective square. If you take the square root, actually no, you put this value of I effective square in the formula for W directly. So the formula for W modifies to 36.5 D square E effective square upon 3600, where W is in watts, D is in meters, E effective is in volts per meter. So the formula for E effective will be 3600 W divided by 36.5 D square. That is what they want, right? Formula describing the interdependence of W, E effective, and D. In MKS system, the formula is 3600 W divided by 36.5 D square. That means, so that's E effective square. So E effective will be 60 divided by square root of 36.5, square root of W divided by D. This is all MKS system. Volts per meter, watts, and meter. Now come back to the units given to us. Be very careful here. If E effective is going to be measured in millivolts per meter, the left-hand side, if it is in volts per meter, in millivolts per meter, it will become 1000 times, right? So the right-hand side has to be multiplied by 1000 if you want to measure E effective in volts, in millivolts per meter. That's what I have done in equation 6. Now, if D happens to be in kilometer, then what will happen is, see, in equation 6, D is in meter. If you want to make D in kilometer, 1000 will go away. So the formula will change to equation 7. D now is in kilometers, not in miles yet. Now, if you make D in miles, you get another correction factor of 1.6 in the denominator. E has already been converted to millivolts per meter. And effective value is already there right in the beginning. We assumed that. So doing all this and finally simplifying the coefficient, I get E effective almost equal to 6.2 multiplied by square root of W divided by D, where E effective is in millivolts per meter, W is in watts, and D is in miles. If they had not told you to play with the units, then your answer would simply have been equation 5, which is the standard MKS system. Okay. Now, one thing that you may want to study further in this equation is whether you take last result or the equation 5, the qualitative conclusions will be the same. If the value of electric field observed is proportional to square root of total radiated power divided by the distance at which you are measuring it. This is, of course, true for lambda by 4 monopole, but I think in general it is true for a lot of antennas. The factor may be different for different antennas, but qualitatively, this relation I think is quite generic. Magnitude of radiated electric field is proportional to square root of radiated power and inversely proportional to the distance at which it is being measured, approximately at least, and assuming you are in far field. It's a very generic conclusion for a lot of antennas. Okay, let's see. Any more solved problems? Yeah, this midterm exam also had one thing. Oh, Argent dipole. No, not that. Yeah, this problem in last year's midterm exam was actually derivation based. Starting with the basic definition of the magnetic vector potential A and the 4 Maxwell's equations and assuming suitably sinusoidal current distributions in the top half and bottom half sections of a jet-directed center-fed dipole antenna of an arbitrary length L equal to 2h, derive the mathematical expressions for the far field components radiated by this antenna. So this is the entire derivation that I've shown you today as well as in the previous lecture. But it is quite involved. It may require almost 30 to 35 minutes minimum to complete this in detail. Now, there's a numerical problem associated with that also. For a 10 centimeter long dipole antenna carrying, remember, just because physical length is given, you cannot assume it's a Hertzian dipole or short dipole or any other kind of dipole. You have to look at the frequency also. So don't draw any conclusions by simply looking at physical length. For a 10 centimeter long dipole antenna carrying a current of so much, so omega is given here. We have done this in the past, but I'm going through it once again, just to reinforce the message. Since the coefficient of exp function is not there, it is 1. So the current actually is 1 ampere peak value. And it is 2 to 4 to 6, 10 to the power 8 J 10 to the power 8 T. T is in seconds, so omega is 10 to the power 8. So frequency will be 10 to the power 8 divided by 2 pi. From there you calculate lambda, then calculate 10 centimeter divided by that lambda, assuming lambda is also in centimeter. And then draw the conclusion whether it is a Hertzian dipole or not. Anyway, so I think we have done this in the past. I think it turned out to be a Hertzian dipole in this particular case. So I will not go too far. This problem was solved in a previous class also. Question 5 is something you cannot handle right now, but we are coming very close to that. We'll revert to this problem later. calculate the directivity, the effective aperture, the radiation resistance, and the effective length of a 10-meter long flat dipole antenna operating at 50. Yeah, this is something we should be able to tackle very soon. And SATCOM problem, of course, you cannot tackle right now. That will also require more theoretical discussion. One thing very important to note is that no matter what kind of antenna you are looking at, there are some expectations from the customer on the antenna. Yeah, this we have done, so I'm not going to waste time on this. What does customer want from the antenna? Lot of parameters are there. One of them is total radiated power versus the input current, which means radiation resistance indirectly. Other thing is at what frequency is the antenna designed, or can it operate over a wider band of frequencies? So bandwidth, that's another important performance parameters. Then, in fact, maybe I should go back to that document once just to be clear about what I'm telling you. If you look at the formula for E field magnitude, forget phase for now, and let's say we are in the far field. So only E theta and H phi do matter. Let's look at the formula for E theta once again carefully. For whatever length, there is a lot of directionality in the behavior of radiated field, especially with respect to theta. Give me 1 minute. I want to pick the correct expressions. Yeah. Okay, first I've calculated H phi, and E theta is eta naught multiplied by H phi. Okay. Yeah, E theta is eta naught H phi. So let's look at H phi carefully then. E theta will be behaving in a similar fashion for far field at least. Ideally speaking, you require a computer program to study the behavior of E theta or H phi with theta, R, frequency, length, etc., current also. But one thing you can clearly see is that if you forget everything else, just look at theta alone, you will be able to appreciate the fact that there is no uniformity with respect to theta in the behavior of the radiated field. In case of a Hertzian dipole, it was much more easy to see because you only saw sine theta function describing the behavior of the radiated field. In case of a dipole of arbitrary length, you see a much more complicated function. Okay, so it's not easy to visualize what is happening. However, if you go to a specific case, let's say lambda by 2 dipole, let's see what happens. Maybe we can see things little better. How would the field change with theta? Forget everything else for now. Special case, yeah. H phi is given by this formula. Here is the theta dependence. It is not easy to visualize fully, I know, but at least if you differentiate this function. By the way, if you take magnitude of H phi or magnitude of E theta, it will depend on magnitude of cos pi by 2 cos theta divided by sin theta. You can try to find maxima and minima of that function. You will find that for certain values of theta, this will go to maximum. For certain values, it may go to 0 also, or minimum. And in between, there will be points where the magnitude of this function will be 1 upon square root of 2 of the maximum. So the value of theta for which this function magnitude is maximum is known as the, what should I say, direction of main beam That is, the principal maximum is lying in that. Okay. The direction of the value of theta for which you see minimum or zero value of this function is the direction of so-called nulls, N-U-L-L-S. I'll show you pictorially maybe in the next lecture how all this is described on a piece of paper. But principal maximum is the direction in which the magnitude of radiated field is maximum. Null is that direction, and there may be more than one nulls, by the way, and sometimes more than one principal maxima also. That is also possible. So the direction of nulls is the one in which minimum or zero radiation is happening. Principal maximum is the direction in which maximum radiation is happening, or main beam is going in that direction. And in between, you will see 1 upon square root of 2 reduced points also, which are known as 3 dB points in the so-called radiation pattern. Okay, so magnitude of E theta versus theta and magnitude of E theta versus phi. These are the two plots which are commonly used to describe the behavior of the radiated field with angles. Of course, in our cases so far, the dependence on phi is not there. So all you see is a circle. But dependence with theta is definitely not a circle. Taken together, all this is called radiation pattern. That is a very important parameter that customer wants to see from an antenna. In which direction the maximum radiation would occur, in which direction the minimum radiation would occur, in which direction 3 dB points will be there, and on and on. Okay. On top of it, input impedance, how high it is, how low it is, how much frequency dependence is there, is very important. And I suppose there's a lot more. There is something called effective length, which is a very important parameter to know for antennas, especially for comparing one antenna with the other. Maybe customer will not be too critical about it, but for designers, it's important to compare the so-called effective length of the antenna from one antenna to another. Also, there is something called effective area or effective aperture. I'll come to all this in detail, but I'm giving you names right now. On top of it, there is something called gain. The direction in which principal maximum is there, how much radiated power is going per unit solid angle in that direction. I'll define solid angle later. Just take it from me as a word right now. The radiation intensity, which is the total radiated power divided by solid angle in a particular direction. I'll explain solid angle later. Just take that as a word from me. So that radiation intensity in the direction of maximum radiation versus the average radiation intensity, that is called gain of the antenna. It essentially captures how directional antenna it is, how directional the antenna is. Is the beam coming out very narrow, or is it very wide, or is it in between? It is very important for the customer to know that. So gain is probably the most important parameter that customer is interested in, besides the so-called bandwidth, input impedance, radiation resistance, etc. Okay. And there are many more things also, but I think these are roughly the things. For these 5 or 6 parameters are the ones that we are going to look at slowly from now on. And we would primarily be looking at dipole antenna alone, at least for now, in trying to compare the performance of the various kinds of dipoles with each other in terms of these parameters, the performance parameters. Okay. Now, before going further, I would like to introduce you to something which you may not have been taught in any mathematics courses, and we will need it. Even today, when we were doing the radiation resistance calculation for lambda by 2 dipole, we had that integral in front of us, which was becoming very challenging. We could have solved it using a computer by using techniques for numerical integration. If you cannot analytically find the value of a definite integral, there are numerical techniques available to get the answer approximately. And two techniques for this so-called numerical integration are Simpson rule and trapezoidal rule. For antennas, they are very critical to be aware of. These are approximations, but they are good enough for a lot of practical cases. So let me give you a brief introduction to these two numerical techniques today, so that in future I don't have to refer to them again and again. Suppose you are dealing with a continuous function small f, and the independent variable is small x. Ideally speaking, you should be able to find analytically any of the the answer for any f. In practice, it's not possible. So in cases where analytical solution is not possible, what you do is you take the limit of integration a to b and subdivide it into, let's say, small n equal intervals, starting from x0, x equal to x0, which is small a, then a plus some value, which is b minus a divided by n, where n could be your choice, 100 points or 50 points or 1000 points, that you will play with to get accuracy as much as you want. The larger the n, the better is the accuracy of the result. So you subdivide the interval a to b into n equal parts, take the length of each interval as b minus a divided by n, and then generate those n values of x. And for each value, you calculate f, because you know fx, and create a